The cold October rain hammered against the windows of the Meridian Tower, 43 floors above the bustling streets of Manhattan. Inside the glass-walled conference room, Marcus Wellington III sat at the head of a mahogany table that cost more than most people earned in a year. His steel-gray eyes scanned the faces of 12 board members, each one avoiding his direct gaze. At 52, Marcus had built Wellington Industries from a modest family shipping business into a global empire worth $8 billion. His grandfather had started with a single cargo ship. His father had expanded to a small fleet. But Marcus had transformed the company into a multinational corporation with interests in shipping, logistics, real estate, and technology. He was known for his ruthless business tactics and his ability to smell weakness from across a boardroom. Today, however, something felt different. The usual deference in the room had been replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Marcus noticed how his longtime business partner, David Chun, kept checking his phone. How the chief financial officer, Sarah Martinez, shuffled through papers without really reading them. How his own nephew, James Wellington, the company's vice president, sat with his arms crossed and a defiant expression on his face. "Gentlemen, ladies," Marcus began, his voice carrying the authority that had intimidated competitors for decades. "I've called this emergency board meeting because I've discovered some irregularities in our quarterly reports." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus had spent the past month conducting a private investigation after noticing discrepancies in the company's financial statements. What he had uncovered was a conspiracy that cut deep into the heart of his organization. "It appears," Marcus continued, his voice growing colder, "that someone has been siphoning funds from our offshore accounts. We're talking about $300 million over the past 18 months. James Wellington shifted in his chair. "Uncle Marcus, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. "This affects the entire board. This affects the future of Wellington Industries." He pulled out a thick manila folder and placed it on the table. "I have evidence that points to organized embezzlement. Bank records, forged signatures, unauthorized wire transfers." David Chin finally looked up from his phone. "Marcus, you're jumping to conclusions. There could be legitimate explanations." "Legitimate explanations?" Marcus opened the folder and spread out documents across the table. "These are copies of transactions made under my digital signature. Transactions I never authorized. Money transferred to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Companies that don't exist on paper, but somehow have received millions of dollars from Wellington Industries." The room erupted into nervous murmurs. Marcus watched as several board members exchanged glances. He had known most of these people for years. David Chun had been his business partner since college. Sarah Martinez had started as an intern and worked her way up to CFO. His nephew James had joined the company 5 years ago, straight out of Harvard Business School. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "I've discovered that these transactions were approved by a majority vote of the board. Votes that took place during meetings I was supposedly attending, but have no memory of. Meetings that, according to these records, I actively participated in." James Wellington stood up abruptly. "Uncle Marcus, I think you need to take a step back. The stress of running this company has clearly affected your judgment." "My judgment?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My judgment built this empire. My judgment turned a small shipping company into a global corporation. My judgment made every person in this room wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. And your judgment has also made you paranoid." Sarah Martinez spoke for the first time. "Marcus, we've all been concerned about your behavior lately. The long hours, the suspicious nature, the way you've been questioning every decision." Marcus realized what was happening. This wasn't just about embezzlement. This was a coordinated effort to remove him from his own company. "You think I'm losing my mind," he said quietly. "We think you need help," David Chin replied. "We've consulted with medical professionals. Early onset dementia can manifest as paranoia and false memories. The symptoms match perfectly with what we've been observing." "False memories?" Marcus's voice rose. "Are you suggesting I imagined building this company? That I imagined every deal, every acquisition, every strategic decision that brought us to this point?" "No one is questioning your past accomplishments," James said, his tone patronizing. "But we have to face reality. You're 52 years old, but you've been under enormous stress for decades. It's not uncommon for successful executives to experience cognitive decline. Marcus looked around the table and saw something that chilled him more than any business rivalry he had ever faced. These people, his own family and closest associates, genuinely believed they were doing the right thing, or they were putting on the performance of their lives. "I've prepared some documents," Sarah Martinez said, sliding a folder across the table to Marcus. "A medical leave of absence. Full pay, full benefits. You can take the time you need to get the help you deserve." Marcus opened the folder and read the first page. It was a letter of resignation, pre-written and requiring only his signature. The second page was a medical evaluation from a psychiatrist he had never met, declaring him unfit for corporate responsibilities due to severe cognitive decline and paranoid delusions. "This is a coup," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is an intervention," David Chin replied. "We care about you, Marcus. We want to help you. If you care about me, then explain these financial records. Explain how $300 million disappeared from company accounts." "There are no missing funds," James said firmly. "You've been imagining things. The stress has created false memories, false concerns. The financial records you think you found don't exist." Marcus realized the full scope of what was happening. They hadn't just stolen money from the company. They had stolen his reality. Every document he thought he had discovered, every piece of evidence he believed he had gathered, was being dismissed as the delusion of a mentally compromised man. "The vote is unanimous," Sarah Martinez announced. "The board has decided to accept your resignation for medical reasons, effective immediately." "I haven't resigned," Marcus said. "You will," James replied. "Because if you don't, we'll have you committed. We have medical evaluations from 3 different psychiatrists. We have testimony from family members, business associates, and employees about your erratic behavior. We have documentation of your paranoid accusations and your inability to distinguish reality from imagination." Marcus understood the trap. If he fought back, if he insisted on his version of events, he would be declared mentally incompetent. His reputation would be destroyed. His life's work would be dismissed as the ravings of a madman. But if he signed the resignation, he would be admitting to cognitive decline and allowing the theft of his company. "I need time to think," Marcus said. "You have until 5 o'clock today," David Chin replied. "Sign the resignation, or we'll initiate commitment proceedings. Either way, you're done at Wellington Industries." Marcus gathered the documents and stood up. For the first time in his adult life, he felt powerless. Every move he could make had been anticipated and countered. Every avenue of resistance had been blocked. As he walked toward the door, James called after him. "Uncle Marcus, this really is for the best. You'll see that once you get the help you need." Marcus turned back to face the room. 12 people who had built the Marcus Wellington spent the night pacing the marble floors of his penthouse, surrounded by the trappings of success that now felt like mockery. Original Picasso paintings watched from the walls as he moved between his study and the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Manhattan. The city sparkled below him, oblivious to the fact that one of its most powerful residents was about to lose everything. By dawn, Marcus had made his decision. He would not sign the resignation. If his former allies wanted to destroy him, they would have to do it publicly. He would force them to reveal their true motives, even if it meant professional suicide. At 8 in the morning, Marcus called his personal attorney, Richard Blackwood, a man who had handled Wellington Industries' legal affairs for 15 years. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Marcus tried again. Same result. On the 3rd attempt, a secretary answered. "Mr. Blackwood's office. This is Marcus Wellington. I need to speak with Richard immediately." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wellington, but Mr. Blackwood is no longer able to represent you due to potential conflicts of interest." "Conflicts of interest? What conflicts?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the details. Mr. Blackwood suggests you seek independent legal counsel." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, realizing that his enemies had moved faster than he had anticipated. They had already contaminated his legal representation. Marcus spent the morning making phone calls, trying to find an attorney willing to take his case. Every law firm he contacted either declined immediately or claimed they were too busy to meet with him. Word had spread through Manhattan's legal community that Marcus Wellington was persona non grata. By noon, Marcus had received a call from his bank. His personal accounts had been frozen pending a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. His credit cards had been canceled. Even his building's concierge informed him that his penthouse was under review by the co-op board due to concerns about his stability. Marcus realized he was being systematically isolated. Every resource he might use to fight back was being eliminated. They weren't just stealing his company. They were erasing his entire existence. At 2 in the afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Elena Vasquez stood at his door, holding her cleaning supplies and looking nervous. Elena had been cleaning Marcus's penthouse twice a week for 3 years. She was a quiet woman in her 40s, originally from Honduras, who spoke broken English but performed her job with meticulous care. "Mr. Wellington," she said hesitantly, "I come to clean, but the doorman, he say maybe I no come anymore. He say you may be moving?" Marcus looked at Elena and realized she was the first person all day who had spoken to him without pity or suspicion. "Come in, Elena. Please." Elena entered the apartment and began unpacking her supplies. As she worked, Marcus found himself talking to her, explaining his situation in simple terms. Elena listened while she dusted and vacuumed, occasionally nodding or making sympathetic sounds. "They say you sick in the head?" Elena asked while organizing Marcus's bookshelf. "They say I'm imagining things. That I'm paranoid." Elena stopped working and looked at him directly. "Mr. Wellington, in 3 years I clean your apartment. I see you work hard. I see you remember everything. Names, numbers, meetings. You always very sharp mind. I no think you sick." Her words were simple, but they were the first validation Marcus had received. Someone believed him. "Elena," Marcus said, "if something happens to me, if I disappear, or if they say I did something crazy, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that I told you I was being set up." Elena nodded gravely. "I remember, Mr. Wellington." At 4:30, Marcus received a call from James Wellington. "Uncle Marcus, have you made your decision?" "I'm not signing anything," Marcus replied. "I'm sorry to hear that. The ambulance will be there in 30 minutes. We have a court order for psychiatric evaluation and emergency commitment. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Marcus hung up and looked at Elena, who was finishing her work in the kitchen. He had 30 minutes before they came for him. "Elena, I need you to do something for me. In my study, there's a safe behind the painting of the ship. The combination is 10-15-43. Inside there's a flash drive with copies of all the evidence I've gathered. I need you to take it." Elena looked frightened. "Mr. Wellington, I no want to get in trouble." "You won't get in trouble. Just keep it safe. If something happens to me, give it to a reporter or a federal agent. Promise me." Elena nodded and went to the study. She returned a few minutes later with a small flash drive, which she tucked into her cleaning supply bag. 20 minutes later, Marcus heard sirens outside his building. He looked down from his window and saw an ambulance, 2 police cars, and several men in suits. His nephew James was among them, pointing up at Marcus's window. Marcus realized he had one chance to escape before they reached his penthouse. The building had a service elevator that connected to the parking garage. If he could reach his car, he might be able to get away long enough to figure out his next move. Marcus grabbed a jacket and what little cash he had in the apartment. As he headed for the door, Elena touched his arm. "Mr. Wellington, be careful. These people, they're very dangerous." "I know, Elena. Thank you for believing me." Marcus used his private elevator to reach the garage, but as the doors opened, he saw 2 security guards waiting for him. James had anticipated this escape route as well. "Mr. Wellington," one of the guards said gently, "please come with us. We're here to help." Marcus backed into the elevator and pressed the button for the basement storage level, a floor below the garage that few people knew existed. The guards rushed forward, but the doors closed just in time. In the basement, Marcus found the maintenance exit that led to an alley behind the building. As he emerged into the daylight, he heard police radios and shouting from above. They had discovered his escape route. Marcus ran through the alley and onto the street, trying to blend into the afternoon crowd. He had no destination in mind, only the desperate need to stay free long enough to prove his sanity and expose the conspiracy. For 2 hours, Marcus wandered through Manhattan, using pay phones to call reporters and federal agents. No one would listen to him. His story sounded like the ravings of a paranoid billionaire who had lost touch with reality. As evening approached, Marcus found himself near the Hudson River. He was exhausted, hungry, and running out of options. Every resource he had once commanded was now turned against him. Every ally had become an enemy. Every institution he had trusted was now hunting him. Marcus sat on a bench overlooking the water and tried to think of a plan. He needed to get the evidence from Elena and find someone willing to investigate his claims. But first, he needed to survive the night without being captured. As darkness fell, Marcus saw headlights approaching along the Riverside Road. 3 black SUVs pulled up near his location, and several men got out. Marcus recognized David Chun and 2 private security contractors he had seen at Wellington Industries. "Marcus," David called out, "it's over. Come with us voluntarily, and this can be handled quietly." Marcus stood up and backed toward the river. "Stay away from me, David. I know what you've done. You're sick, Marcus. You need help. These paranoid delusions are destroying your life." "The only thing destroying my life is your greed," Marcus replied. "How long have you been planning this? How long have you been stealing from the company?" David sighed and gestured to the security contractors. "Take him. Use sedatives if necessary." The men began moving toward Marcus. He had nowhere to run except toward the water. The Hudson River was dark and cold, probably 40 degrees in late October. Jumping in would likely be suicide. But as the contractors closed in, Marcus realized that staying meant certain capture and probable commitment to a psychiatric facility where he could be held indefinitely. At least in the river, he would have a chance. Marcus backed to the edge of the wooden pier and looked down at the black water 20 feet below. "This isn't over, David. The truth will come out." "The only truth," David replied, "is that you've lost your mind." Marcus took a deep breath and jumped. The shock of the cold water nearly stopped his heart. The current was stronger than he had expected, pulling him away from the pier and deeper into the river. As he struggled to stay afloat, Marcus could hear shouting from above, but the voices grew fainter as the current carried him downstream. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Hudson River. The morning mist clung to the water like a shroud, hiding the debris and urban waste that washed against the rocky shoreline of Riverside Park. Most New Yorkers hurried past this stretch of the river without a second glance, focused on their commutes and their coffee, unaware of the human drama that had unfolded in the dark waters just hours before. Mabel Johnson was different from most New Yorkers. At 62, she had been walking this same path along the river every morning for the past 15 years, ever since her husband died and left her alone in their small apartment in Washington Heights. The morning walk was her meditation, her connection to something larger than the cramped world of cleaning offices and apartments that filled her days. Mabel had immigrated to New York from Jamaica 35 years ago, carrying nothing but determination and a fierce work ethic. She had raised 3 children while working multiple jobs, put 2 of them through college, and survived economic hardships that would have broken many people. Her hands bore the calluses of decades spent cleaning other people's messes, but her spirit remained unbroken. This particular morning felt different. The October air carried an unusual chill, and the river seemed more restless than usual. As Mabel walked along the path, something caught her eye among the rocks and driftwood that lined the shore. At first glance, it looked like a pile of discarded clothing, but as she moved closer, she realized with horror that it was a person. The man was lying face down in the shallow water, his body wedged between 2 large rocks. His expensive suit was torn and waterlogged, and his skin had the pale, bluish tint of someone who had been in cold water for hours. Mabel's first instinct was that he was dead, but something made her wade into the frigid water to check. "Lord have mercy," she whispered as she turned the man over. His face was battered and swollen, but he was still breathing, though barely. His lips were blue, and his pulse was so weak that Mabel had to press her fingers firmly against his neck to detect it. Mabel looked around the empty park and realized she was alone. The nearest payphone was 3 blocks away, and she didn't own a cell phone. If she left to call for help, this man would certainly die before anyone arrived. But if she stayed, she might not be able to save him anyway. Drawing on strength she didn't know she possessed, Mabel dragged the unconscious man out of the water and onto the rocky shore. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight that nearly caused her to slip back into the river. Once she had him on dry ground, she could see the full extent of his condition. The man was suffering from severe hypothermia. His core temperature was dangerously low, and his body had shut down all non-essential functions to preserve life. Mabel had seen hypothermia before, growing up in the mountains of Jamaica where the nights could be surprisingly cold. She knew that warming someone too quickly could be as dangerous as leaving them cold. Mabel removed her own coat, a thick wool garment she had bought at a thrift store, and wrapped it around the man's torso. She pulled off his waterlogged shoes and socks, then used her scarf to dry his feet and hands. The most important thing was to prevent further heat loss while gradually raising his body temperature. "Come on, honey," she whispered as she worked. "You don't get to give up now. Somebody worked too hard to bring you this far." Mabel positioned herself behind the man and pulled his back against her chest, sharing her body heat while shielding him from the wind. It was an intimate gesture from a stranger, but necessity overrode social conventions. She could feel how cold he was through the wet fabric of his shirt. For 20 minutes, Mabel held the dying man against her, talking to him softly and massaging his hands and feet to encourage circulation. Gradually, his breathing became more regular, and she could feel warmth returning to his extremities. "That's right," she encouraged him. "You stay with me now. Don't you dare think about leaving." The man's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. He tried to speak, but could only produce a hoarse whisper. Mabel leaned closer to hear him. "They tried to kill me," he managed to say. Mabel studied his battered face and saw something that alarmed her. This wasn't just a man who had fallen into the river. The bruises on his face were fresh, and his injuries suggested violence. Someone had hurt this man before he ended up in the water. "Who tried to kill you, honey?" Mabel asked gently. The man's eyes focused on her for the first time. "Don't trust anyone," he whispered. "They'll come looking." Mabel realized she was in a dangerous situation. This man wasn't just a drowning victim. He was someone fleeing from people who wanted him dead. If his attackers were still looking for him, being found with him could put her own life at risk. But as she looked at his face, pale and vulnerable in the morning light, Mabel knew she couldn't abandon him. Whatever trouble he was in, whatever enemies he had made, he was now under her protection. "What's your name?" she asked. "Marcus," he replied, his voice growing slightly stronger. "Marcus Wellington." Mabel didn't recognize the name, but she could tell from his clothes and his manner of speaking that he was wealthy, probably very wealthy, which made his presence in the Hudson River even more mysterious. "Well, Marcus Wellington," Mabel said, "I'm Mabel Johnson, and right now I'm the only friend you've got in this world. Can you walk?" Marcus tried to sit up, but collapsed back against her. The hypothermia had weakened him more than Mabel had realized. He would need hours of careful warming before he could move under his own power. "I've got to get you somewhere safe," Mabel said, "but I can't carry you, and I can't call an ambulance if people are trying to hurt you." Marcus grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "No hospitals," he said urgently. "No police. They've bought them all." Mabel didn't understand what he meant, but she could see the genuine terror in his eyes. Whatever conspiracy he believed in, real or imagined, his fear was absolutely authentic. "Okay," Mabel said. "No hospitals. But we can't stay here. Someone will see us eventually." Mabel looked around the park and remembered the maintenance shed near the children's playground. It was used by the parks department to store equipment, and she had noticed that the lock was broken. If she could get Marcus there, they would have shelter while she figured out what to do next. "Can you lean on me?" she asked. Marcus nodded and allowed Mabel to help him to his feet. He was unsteady but mobile, and together they made their way slowly across the park. To any observer, they would have looked like a homeless couple seeking shelter, which was exactly what Mabel hoped. The maintenance shed was small and cluttered, filled with lawn mowers and gardening tools, but it was dry and hidden from view. Mabel helped Marcus settle onto a pile of canvas tarps, then used more tarps to create a makeshift bed. "You need dry clothes," Mabel said, "and something hot to drink. I'm going to leave you for a little while, but I'll be back." Marcus grabbed her hand as she turned to go. "Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Mabel looked at this man who had everything and now had nothing. Honey, I've been cleaning up other people's messes my whole life. I've seen rich people and poor people, good people and bad people. But when I found you in that river, you weren't rich or poor. You were just a human being who needed help. She paused and smiled. Besides, my grandmother always told me that sometimes God sends angels in disguise. Maybe you're my angel, or maybe I'm yours. Either way, we're in this together now. Mabel left the shed and made her way to a nearby deli where she bought coffee, soup, and a set of cheap clothes from a thrift store next door. She paid with money from her grocery budget, knowing she would have to eat rice and beans for the rest of the week. When she returned to the shed, Marcus was asleep. The color had returned to his face, and his breathing was normal. As she watched him rest, Mabel wondered what kind of trouble could drive a wealthy man to jump into the Hudson River in October. Whatever it was, she had committed herself to helping him. Mabel Johnson, who had never owned more than a few $100s at one time, had become the protector of a man whose name would soon be in newspapers across the country. What she didn't know was that in corporate offices throughout Manhattan, powerful people were already mobilizing resources to find Marcus Wellington. Dead or alive, he represented a threat that had to be eliminated. But they had made one crucial error in their calculations. They had assumed that a billionaire would seek help from other wealthy and powerful people. They had monitored his attorneys, his banks, his social connections, and his business associates. 3 days after pulling Marcus Wellington from the Hudson River, Mabel Johnson found herself living a life she could never have imagined. She had called in sick to her cleaning jobs, using vacation days she had been saving for her grandson's graduation. Her small apartment in Washington Heights had been transformed into a safe house for one of America's most wanted men. Marcus had recovered enough to tell Mabel his full story, and, with each detail, she understood more clearly the danger they both faced. The conspiracy to steal Wellington Industries was more sophisticated than anything she had seen in crime movies. These people had money, influence, and the ability to manipulate legal systems. They're not just stealing my company, Marcus explained as he sat at Mabel's kitchen table, wearing clothes she had bought from the Salvation Army store. They're rewriting history. According to every official record, I voluntarily resigned due to mental illness. My own signature is on documents I never signed. Medical reports from doctors I never met declare me incompetent. Mabel poured him another cup of coffee and sat down across from him. In 3 days, she had watched this man transform from a broken victim into a strategic thinker. His business mind was clearly intact, despite what his enemies claimed. What about the evidence you gave to Elena? Mabel asked. That's our only hope, Marcus replied. But Elena is just a cleaning lady from Honduras. She's probably terrified and doesn't know who to trust. Even if she wanted to help, who would believe her? Mabel understood the challenge. She had spent her life being invisible to powerful people. When you cleaned their offices and apartments, you heard things, saw things, learned things about their real nature. But your testimony was worthless because you were expendable. Maybe that's exactly why she's perfect, Mabel said thoughtfully. They're watching for you to contact lawyers, reporters, government officials. But they're not watching cleaning ladies. Marcus looked at her with new respect. You're saying we use Elena as a messenger. I'm saying we use the invisible network, Mabel replied. You rich folks think you know how this city works, but you only see the surface. There's another New York underneath, made up of people who clean your buildings, deliver your food, watch your children, guard your doors. We see everything, and we talk to each other. Over the next 2 days, Mabel put her plan into action. She contacted Rosa, who cleaned offices at the New York Times. Rosa connected her with Carmen, who worked as a nanny for a family in the Upper East Side. Carmen knew Isabel, who cleaned apartments in the same building where several Wall Street executives lived. Through this network of domestic workers, Mabel began gathering information about the conspiracy against Marcus. She learned that Wellington Industries stock was being artificially suppressed while certain investors bought shares at below-market prices. She discovered that several board members had taken out massive life insurance policies on Marcus, with premiums paid by company funds. Most importantly, she located Elena Vasquez. Elena was hiding in her sister's apartment in Queens, terrified to return to work. She still had the flash drive Marcus had given her, But she was afraid to leave her sister's apartment for fear of being arrested or deported. "Tell her I understand her fear," Marcus said when Mabel reported Elena's situation. "But tell her that if we don't act now, they'll destroy both of us anyway." Mabel took the subway to Queens, carrying a bag of groceries as cover for her visit. Elena's sister lived in a crowded apartment building where Spanish was the primary language and immigration status was a constant worry. Mabel found Elena sitting in a corner of her sister's living room, looking like she hadn't slept in days. When Mabel explained that Marcus was alive and needed her help, Elena began crying. "They came to my apartment," Elena said in broken English. "Two men in suits. They asked me questions about Mr. Wellington. They say he very sick man, very dangerous. They say if I help him, I get in big trouble." "Elena," Mabel said gently, "I need you to trust me. Mr. Wellington is not sick. The people who came to your apartment are the real criminals. They stole money from his company, and now they're trying to steal his life." Elena reached into a pillowcase and pulled out the flash drive. "I keep it safe, like he asked, but I don't know what to do with it." "We're going to give it to someone who can help," Mabel said. "But first, we need to make copies and hide them in different places." That evening, Mabel and Elena went to a public library in Jackson Heights, where the computers were anonymous and the security cameras were broken. Elena's nephew, who was studying computer science, helped them copy the flash drive contents to multiple devices. What they found on the drive was devastating. Marcus had documented 18 months of systematic embezzlement, involving not just Wellington Industries, but several other companies where the same group of executives served on multiple boards. The conspiracy was much larger than anyone had realized. "This isn't just about Mr. Wellington," Elena said as they reviewed the evidence. "They're doing this to many companies." Mabel realized they had stumbled onto something that could bring down some of the most powerful people in New York's financial district. But that also meant the danger was exponentially greater than they had imagined. The next morning, Mabel contacted Carmen, who worked for a family whose father was a federal prosecutor. Through careful conversation, Carmen learned that the prosecutor was investigating financial crimes in the maritime shipping industry. It was a perfect match. "We need to be very careful about how we approach this," Marcus warned. "If we contact the wrong person, or if word gets back to the conspiracy, they'll have us killed before we can testify." Mabel had an idea. She called her church, Mount Olivet Baptist, and spoke with Reverend Williams, who had been a community leader for 30 years. Reverend Williams knew Judge Patricia Morrison, an African-American federal judge with a reputation for integrity and independence. "If anyone can be trusted with this information," Reverend Williams told Mabel, "it's Judge Morrison. She grew up in this neighborhood, and she hasn't forgotten where she came from." Mabel arranged to meet Judge Morrison at the church on Sunday evening, after regular services. She brought Marcus with her, disguised in clothes that made him look like any other parishioner. Judge Morrison was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see through any deception. When Mabel explained the situation and showed her the evidence, the judge studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who had seen many elaborate frauds. "If this is authentic," Judge Morrison said finally, "we're talking about multiple federal crimes. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, possibly murder conspiracy. But the evidence has to be verified by experts, and the people involved will have the best lawyers money can buy." "Can you help us?" Marcus asked. "I can connect you with people who can help," the judge replied. "But you need to understand something. Once this starts, you'll be in protective custody for months, possibly years. Your life as you knew it is over, regardless of the outcome." Marcus looked at Mabel, who had risked everything to save him. "What do you think?" "I think," Mabel said, "that some things are more important than being comfortable. If we don't stop these people, they'll just find other victims." Judge Morrison made a phone call to FBI agent Sarah Chun, who specialized in white-collar crime and had a reputation for taking on powerful adversaries. Agent Chun agreed to meet them the next morning at a secure location. That night, Marcus and Mabel sat in her small apartment, knowing it would probably be their last night of relative peace. Tomorrow, they would either expose one of the largest financial conspiracies in American history, or they would both disappear forever. "Mabel," Marcus said, "when this is over, assuming we survive it, 6 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Manhattan was packed with reporters, lawyers, and spectators for what the media had dubbed the trial of the century. United States versus Chun, Wellington Jr., Martinez, and 7 other defendants had captivated the nation with its story of corporate conspiracy, attempted murder, and an unlikely friendship that brought down an empire of corruption. Marcus Wellington sat in the front row of the courtroom, wearing a simple dark suit that Mabel had helped him pick out. The man who had once commanded boardrooms with imperious authority now understood that real power came from truth and justice, not fear and manipulation. Beside him sat Mabel Johnson, no longer the invisible cleaning lady who had pulled him from the Hudson River. The trial had made her a celebrity, though she remained uncomfortable with the attention. She wore a navy blue dress that her church had bought for her court appearances, and her testimony had become the moral centerpiece of the prosecution's case. FBI agent Sarah Chun approached the witness stand to present the final pieces of evidence. Over the past 6 months, the investigation had uncovered a conspiracy that reached far beyond Wellington Industries. The defendants had been systematically looting multiple corporations, using a sophisticated network of shell companies, forged documents, and corrupted medical professionals. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Agent Chin began, the evidence will show that the defendants didn't just steal money. They stole identities, reputations, and, in Marcus Wellington's case, they attempted to steal his life itself. The trial had revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. David Chun, Marcus's former business partner, had been planning the takeover for 3 years. James Wellington, Marcus's own nephew, had been recruited with promises of inheriting control of the company. Sarah Martinez, the CFO, had provided the technical expertise to manipulate financial records and forge authorization documents. The conspiracy had involved corrupt psychiatrists who provided false medical evaluations, lawyers who abandoned their clients on command, and even judges who had been bribed to issue commitment orders. The tentacles of corruption reached into every institution that Marcus had once trusted. But the defendants had made one fatal error. They had assumed that a billionaire's salvation would come from other wealthy and powerful people. They had never considered that Marcus Wellington's life would be saved by a cleaning lady from Jamaica who possessed something they lacked: genuine moral courage. Elena Vasquez took the stand on the 4th day of the trial. She testified about receiving the flash drive from Marcus and keeping it safe despite threats and intimidation. Her testimony was delivered in halting English, but her sincerity was unmistakable. "Mr. Wellington, he never treat me like I was invisible," Elena said. "He always say good morning, always ask about my family. When he give me that computer thing, I know he trust me. I no let him down." The defense attorneys tried to discredit Elena as an unreliable witness, suggesting that her immigration status and limited English made her testimony suspect. But their attacks backfired, making the jury sympathetic to a woman who had risked everything to do the right thing. Mabel's testimony came on the 6th day. She walked to the witness stand with the same dignity she brought to every challenge in her life. When the prosecutor asked her to describe finding Marcus in the river, her voice was steady and clear. "I saw a human being who needed help," Mabel testified. "I didn't know if he was rich or poor, innocent or guilty. I just knew that if I walked away, he would die. My grandmother always taught me that when God puts someone in your path who needs help, you don't ask questions. You just help." The defense tried to suggest that Mabel had been motivated by the promise of money from Marcus. But when they asked her directly about any financial arrangements, her response silenced the courtroom. "Mr. Wellington offered to pay me, and I told him no. I didn't save his life for money. I saved it because it was right. The day I start charging people for basic human decency is the day I stop being the woman my grandmother raised me to be." Marcus testified on the 8th day, recounting the systematic destruction of his life and the conspiracy to steal his company. But the most powerful moment came when the prosecutor asked him about his relationship with Mabel. "Mrs. Johnson saved more than my life," Marcus said. "She saved my faith in human goodness. For weeks after she pulled me from that river, I lived in her apartment, ate her food, wore clothes she bought with her grocery money. She had every reason to be suspicious of me, every reason to turn me in for the reward money. But she never wavered in her support." Marcus paused and looked at Mabel. I spent my whole life thinking that power came from money and influence. Mabel taught me that real power comes from doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony was compelling, and the jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. David Chun received 25 years in prison. James Wellington received 15 years. Sarah Martinez received 12 years. The other defendants received sentences ranging from 5 to 18 years. But the real victory came in the aftermath of the trial. The investigation sparked by Marcus's case led to a comprehensive reform of corporate governance laws. New protections were put in place for whistleblowers, and new oversight mechanisms were established to prevent the kind of systematic fraud that had nearly destroyed Wellington Industries. Marcus was reinstated as CEO of Wellington Industries, but he transformed the company in ways that reflected the lessons he had learned. He established a foundation to support immigrant workers and domestic employees. He created a whistleblower protection program that offered legal and financial support to anyone reporting corporate fraud. He instituted profit-sharing programs that gave every employee, from executives to cleaning staff, a stake in the company's success. Most importantly, Marcus established the Mabel Johnson Center for Corporate Ethics, a research institute dedicated to studying and preventing white-collar crime. Mabel agreed to serve as the center's first director, though she insisted on keeping the salary modest. "I don't need to be rich," Mabel explained to reporters. "I just need to know that what happened to Mr. Wellington won't happen to someone else who doesn't have an angel watching over them." Elena Vasquez was granted permanent residency status and received a full scholarship to study accounting at City University. She planned to specialize in forensic accounting, helping law enforcement agencies investigate financial crimes. 2 years after the trial, Marcus and Mabel remained close friends. They met every Sunday at Mount Olivet Baptist Church, where Marcus had become a regular member of the congregation. The billionaire and the former cleaning lady had forged a bond that transcended class, race, and background. "People ask me if I ever regret jumping into that river," Marcus said during an interview on the 2nd anniversary of his rescue. "The truth is, that was the best decision I ever made. Not because it helped me expose the conspiracy, but because it led me to Mabel. She taught me that wealth means nothing if you don't have character, and power means nothing if you don't use it to help others." Mabel remained characteristically humble about her role in the events. "I just did what any decent person would do," she insisted. The real hero in this story is Mr. Wellington, who had the courage to fight back against people who had everything to gain by destroying him. But those who knew the full story understood that Mabel Johnson was far more than a good Samaritan who happened to be in the right place at the right time. She was a woman of extraordinary moral courage who risked her own safety to protect a stranger, and who refused to be intimidated by some of the most powerful people in America. The conspiracy to destroy Marcus Wellington had been built on the assumption that money and influence could overcome truth and justice. The conspirators had controlled banks, law firms, medical institutions, and even judges. They had turned Marcus's own family against him and isolated him from every resource he might use to fight back. But they had never anticipated the intervention of Mabel Johnson, a woman whose only weapons were compassion, courage, and an unshakable belief in doing what was right. In the end, those weapons proved more powerful than all the money and influence in Manhattan. The story of Marcus Wellington and Mabel Johnson became a symbol of hope in an age when many Americans had lost faith in justice. It proved that heroism could come from unexpected places, that ordinary people could defeat extraordinary corruption, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the world was the simple decision to help someone in need. As Marcus rebuilt his empire and Mabel directed her research center, both knew that their greatest achievement wasn't the money they had saved or the criminals they had exposed. Their greatest achievement was proving that in a world often dominated by greed and selfishness, human decency could still triumph. The Hudson River continued to flow past Manhattan, carrying its cargo of urban debris toward the Atlantic Ocean. But now it also carried a different kind of story, a story of redemption, friendship, and the transformative power of simple human kindness. It was a story that would be told for generations, inspiring others to believe that one person's decision to help a stranger could change the world. And you to know that you'll never have to clean another office or apartment unless you choose to. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life. Mabel smiled. Honey, I didn't save your life for money. I saved it because it was the right thing to do. But if you really want to thank me, use whatever power you get back to help other people like Elena, like the women who work in your building, like all the invisible people who keep this city running. I promise, Marcus said. Outside Mabel's window, the lights of Manhattan twinkled in the distance, representing billions of dollars in commerce and industry. Somewhere in those towers, powerful people were sleeping peacefully, confident that they had eliminated Marcus Wellington and covered their tracks perfectly. They had no idea that their downfall was being planned in a modest apartment in Washington Heights by a billionaire and a cleaning lady who had become unlikely allies in a fight for justice. By morning, the most dangerous phase of their mission would begin. But tonight, Marcus Wellington and Mabel Johnson sat together as equals, two people who had found in each other the courage to challenge an empire built on greed and deception. The battle for Wellington Industries was about to begin in earnest, and its outcome would determine whether justice could triumph over power in 21st century America. They had never considered that Marcus Wellington's life might depend on a Jamaican immigrant who made $8 an hour cleaning offices. As evening approached, Mabel sat beside the sleeping man and wondered if she had saved his life or simply delayed his death. Tomorrow, she would have to decide whether to trust him with her own life. Because if Marcus Wellington was telling the truth about his enemies, helping him had put Mabel Johnson in the crosshairs of people who killed for money and power. Outside the maintenance shed, New York continued its relentless pace, unaware that the fate of an $8 billion empire now rested in the hands of a woman whose greatest asset was her unbreakable compassion. The water was so cold that his muscles began to cramp almost immediately. His expensive shoes filled with water and dragged him down. His jacket became a waterlogged weight that threatened to pull him under. Marcus tried to swim toward shore, but the current was too strong. He was being swept toward the open harbor, where the water would be even colder and the chance of rescue even smaller. As hypothermia began to set in, Marcus realized that his desperate escape attempt had become a death sentence. The last thing Marcus remembered before losing consciousness was seeing the lights of Manhattan growing dimmer as the river carried him toward darkness. Our careers on his success were now systematically destroying him. If I'm truly losing my mind, he said quietly, then explain one thing to me. How did I manage to discover this conspiracy? How did a man with dementia and paranoid delusions manage to uncover a complex financial fraud that you've been planning for months? The silence that followed told Marcus everything he needed to know. They had underestimated him, even as they destroyed him. Marcus left the Meridian Tower and walked into the October rain. He had 6 hours to decide whether to fight a battle he couldn't win or surrender everything he had worked for. As he walked through the crowded streets of Manhattan, Marcus Wellington III, one of the most powerful men in America, realized that he had never felt more alone. The rain soaked through his expensive suit as he made his way toward his penthouse apartment. He needed to think, to plan, to find some way out of the trap that had been so carefully constructed around him. But, deep down, he knew that by the end of the day, he would no longer be the head of Wellington Industries. What Marcus didn't know was that his enemies had already planned for every contingency except one. They had anticipated his legal challenges, his medical appeals, even his potential suicide. But they had not anticipated that within 24 hours, Marcus Wellington would be fighting for his life in the dark waters of the Hudson River, and that his survival would depend on a woman whose name they didn't even know. As Marcus reached his building, he turned to look back at the Meridian Tower. Somewhere in that glass and steel monument to his success, 12 people were celebrating the end of his reign. They believed they had thought of everything. They were wrong.